The oil rig, located in the middle of the ocean, was suddenly engulfed in a white fog. What made everyone feel desperate was the strange phenomena appearing within the mist. On the rig, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, the staff were eagerly discussing their upcoming time off when the lights above them began flickering, and all electrical equipment abruptly stopped working. They were forced to switch to backup power. The employees quickly moved outside, as a power outage on the rig was a serious issue, posing a high risk of gas leaks. Alwyn was terrified to see a nearby rig already engulfed in flames, and the railings of the rig he stood on began to tremble slightly. Magnus, the person in charge, noticed the anomaly and attempted to contact the rescue ship, but the communication line was damaged. Suddenly, a section of the rig burst into flames. The extreme pressure in the oil well had ignited it spontaneously. Thankfully, Alwyn reacted quickly. He rushed to the control room and discovered the pressure in the oil well was rising rapidly. He asked Magnus if they should shut off the pipeline. Magnus hesitated because doing so would sever the supply line to the mainland, costing tens of thousands of dollars every minute. Ultimately, however, seeing the pressure climb uncontrollably, he gave the order to cut the pipeline. Alwyn executed the command immediately. The flames inside the pipeline flared higher before gradually dying down and extinguishing completely. The crew had narrowly escaped danger this time. However, they needed to find the cause of the issue quickly. Working on an offshore rig was like playing with death. Any slight mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences. As everyone prepared to leave the work area, the entire rig suddenly shook violently, as if it was about to collapse and be swallowed by the sea. The employees clung tightly to the railings, their hearts pounding in fear. Thankfully, the shaking stopped after a short while. But just as they started to calm down, they witnessed a horrifying sight, a thick, white mist rapidly approaching. In the blink of an eye, the fog swallowed the nearby rig and the rescue ship. Soon after, everyone was engulfed by the mist. They had worked on the sea for many years but had never seen such a peculiar fog. Visibility dropped to less than a meter. Luckily, the power was restored. The senior managers convened to discuss the cause of the tremors. Could this have been triggered by an undersea earthquake? Rose, a geology expert, explained that the geological structure of the area was incredibly stable, ruling out the possibility of an earthquake. Alwyn offered a different perspective. We've been relentlessly extracting resources from the earth. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, he remarked. Magnus remained rational. He stressed that the most important task was to contact headquarters for rescue. However, with the communication system damaged, they were forced to send someone to fix it. Quickly, 2 repair workers, fully equipped with protective gear, headed to the signal tower. Leading the way was a young man named Baz. Despite his fear, Baz gritted his teeth and moved slowly through the dense fog, feeling as though he was walking through hell. Suddenly, a seagull flew by, startling Baz so much that his limbs went limp. Fortunately, his safety harness held him in place, preventing him from falling. Another repair worker, Fulmer, soon climbed up the tower. Fulmer, a seasoned communication technician with years of experience on the rig, helped calm Baz's nerves. Together, they managed to reach the top of the tower and fix the issue. As Baz packed up his tools to descend, he noticed a dead bird lying on the tower for no apparent reason. Then, a horrifying incident occurred. Baz lost his footing and fell from the tower. The rig staff rushed to his side, checked his pulse, and found he was still alive. They immediately placed him on a stretcher and carried him to the medical bay. The doctor examined Baz and discovered that, in addition to visible external injuries, his internal organs were severely damaged. With the rig's limited medical facilities, saving Baz's life was impossible. The only option was to call a helicopter to transport him to a hospital. However, the dense fog made flying impossible, leaving Baz's fate hanging by a thread. Fulmer felt immense guilt, blaming himself for not watching over Baz more carefully. To make matters worse, despite the repaired communication system, headquarters still hadn't responded to their calls. The situation took a darker turn when Rose, the assistant geologist, discovered that not only their rig but all rigs in the area had been shut down. Such an event was unprecedented. What could have caused this? Amid the mounting troubles, Magnus, the rig supervisor, focused solely on getting everyone back to safety, abandoning any thoughts of oil extraction. Hutton, a senior employee, was the first to lose patience. He blamed Magnus's poor leadership for Baz's accident, arguing that Magnus should never have sent Baz to repair the signal tower. Magnus, unwilling to argue, brushed Hutton off and left the office. However, Hutton wasn't finished. He found a file on Magnus's desk. Meanwhile, Magnus was discussing solutions with Rose when a subordinate reported that Hutton was stirring up trouble again. This time, Hutton had gathered all the staff on the rig to publicly criticize Magnus, accusing him not only of sending Baz to his doom but also of destroying everyone's chance of returning home. Magnus, struggling to contain his anger, confronted Hutton. He scolded him for spreading baseless accusations, but Hutton had come prepared. He pulled out the file he had found earlier. Magnus's face turned pale. He snatched the file from Hutton's hands and, with a heavy heart, announced to the crew that due to plummeting oil prices, headquarters had decided to shut down all rigs in the area. This meant that everyone would soon lose their jobs. Magnus originally planned to announce the information after everyone returned to the mainland. However, due to the dense fog, they were all stranded on the rig. At that moment, something began falling from the sky. At first, everyone thought it was snow, but upon closer inspection, they realized it was tiny black fragments resembling ash from a fire. They stared at the sky in confusion, wondering where these ashes were coming from. Then, an even stranger event occurred. Baz, who had been severely injured and barely clinging to life in the medical bay, suddenly appeared on the rig, muttering incomprehensible words. Dr. Cat quickly reacted, helping Baz back to the medical bay. After a thorough examination, she discovered that Baz's wounds had nearly healed. Assistant Rose urgently asked Baz what had happened on the signal tower. Baz couldn't recall much. All he could remember was static noise in his head and a vague image of something in the fog. Baz became increasingly agitated and eventually burst out, mumbling, "It's coming." Cat calmed him and asked what was coming. Baz replied it was a terrifying tsunami. He was then sedated and drifted into sleep. Outside, Dr. Cat and Rose were deeply concerned. Baz's condition was highly unusual, and the rapid healing of his injuries defied logic. Even the other staff felt uneasy, no longer worrying about losing their jobs. Their only desire was to leave this eerie place. At that moment, a patterned light flashed across the sea. A rescue ship signal. Lek, a crew member, was sent to the rig to record the signals. The black debris continued to fall from the sky, heightening Lek's fear. He hastily jotted down the flashing frequency on his arm while observing the rescue ship. Soon, the message was translated, SOS. Magnus immediately ordered a response signal to ensure the rescue ship and the nearby rig saw it. He then deliberated about evacuating the crew onto the ship to return to the port. However, Rose quickly objected. She argued that the rig wasn't in immediate danger, so evacuating wasn't necessary. Moreover, she wanted to resume work as soon as possible. Magnus hesitated but ultimately agreed, noting that the rescue ship might not be safe either. It was better to assess the situation first. As the rig's leader, Magnus had to consider all potential risks. He later instructed the cook to prepare meals as usual for the evening but warned that if the situation didn't improve, they would need to reduce rations the next day. Unfortunately, unexpected events unfolded rapidly. After responding to the rescue ship, Lek suddenly experienced excruciating pain. He headed to the medical bay, but Dr. Cat wasn't there. Left with no choice, Lek grabbed antiseptics to treat himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that the black particles in the air were highly unusual. While removing his clothes, Lek accidentally splattered a black liquid. His fear grew stronger, and he hastily washed off the black stains on his body. However, blood began to seep from various parts of his skin. Feeling increasingly weak, Lek eventually slipped into a hazy, semi-conscious state. At the same time, Rose had finished collecting samples of the black debris. Despite being a geology expert, she couldn't determine the composition of the fragments just by looking. A thorough geological analysis was needed to uncover their origin. Meanwhile, Baz, who had been unconscious, suddenly woke up. He realized his body had recovered significantly. Removing the bandages, he discovered that wounds previously bleeding had now completely healed. Baz was shocked, staring in disbelief. Using a medical tool's reflection, he noticed his left eye, once injured, was fully restored. However, the dark circles under his eyes were so pronounced that they gave his face an eerie appearance. Once again, Baz felt a tsunami rushing toward him. After a long moment, he regained his composure but was overcome with fear. He desperately wanted to escape the rig, his only hope lying in the helipad outside. Unexpectedly, a sharp pain erupted from his mouth. A false tooth suddenly fell out. Baz widened his eyes in terror, wondering what mysterious force resided in the fog. What were those black particles floating in the air? Could anyone on the rig still make it home safely? Baz, the man who had fallen 30 meters, not only survived but had his injuries healed completely overnight. These bizarre occurrences made him even more desperate to leave. Yet, the dense fog had cut off all hope of escape. While Baz was hiding in the control room, unsure of what to do, Alwyn suddenly entered. Seeing Baz's panicked state, Alwyn tried to calm him, assuring him, once you get to the city hospital, they'll surely fix everything. However, Baz's condition was unusual. He continuously heard static noise in his head. Suddenly, he hallucinated a vision of Alwyn's gruesome death. Terrified, Baz trembled and fled the control room. Alwyn noticed circles drawn by Baz on the glass door but couldn't decipher their meaning. Worried about Baz's unstable state, Alwyn feared a tragic accident might occur. Taking a flashlight, Alwyn ventured into the dense fog to search for Baz. In a hallway, he encountered Fulmer, the veteran communications technician, who was also searching. It turned out that a few minutes earlier, Hutton, after inciting the staff and challenging management's authority, had been confined to a private room for reflection. However, after seeing the rescue ship's message, Hutton escaped through a window. Fulmer suspected Hutton was trying to board the rescue ship to flee, so he began searching everywhere. Unfortunately, while closing a hatch, Fulmer accidentally sliced his palm. The mysterious black dust continued to float in the air, but Fulmer ignored it and kept searching for Hutton, unaware that Hutton had already made his way to the control room. It turned out Hutton wasn't planning to escape alone. He wanted to bring everyone on the rig with him. The rescue ship nearby was their only hope of survival. Using the manual, Hutton sent an emergency distress signal to the rescue ship. When others noticed the flashing signal lights, their first reaction was to head to the control room. Unfortunately, they were a step too late. The rescue ship had already received the signal and was rapidly approaching the rig. Magnus was furious. He argued that the situation was still unclear, and boarding the rescue ship might be even more dangerous. However, Hutton insisted that staying on the rig meant certain death. Magnus didn't want to argue further. He used the loudspeaker to cancel the emergency evacuation order, instructing everyone to return inside the rig and await further instructions. This infuriated the staff, who cursed and accused management of playing with their lives. Despite the orders, Alwyn remained outside, searching for Baz. He eventually found him on the lowest level of the rig. Alwyn urged Baz to come back with him, but he suddenly noticed the ocean water emitting an eerie blue glow. Baz, seemingly a different person, muttered, "I've seen it." "What did you see?" Alwyn asked. Baz replied, "It's life from beneath the ocean." Alwyn grew increasingly anxious as the rescue ship neared. However, Baz resisted fiercely, grabbing Alwyn's clothes. Out of nowhere, Alwyn vomited a large amount of water, leaving him stunned. Meanwhile, the rescue ship sped toward the rig. Just as it seemed about to collide, it sharply veered, sending a massive wave crashing onto the rig before steering away. The crew watched in confusion, wondering if the ship had abandoned them. On the lowest level of the rig, Alwyn was found unconscious, but Baz had disappeared. Despite efforts to revive him, Alwyn couldn't be saved. Dr. Cat was in disbelief. Alwyn had died from drowning, yet he had never come into contact with seawater. Magnus didn't dwell on the mystery. Overwhelmed with grief, Alwyn had been his longest-serving, most dedicated worker. But Magnus didn't know that Alwyn wasn't the only one to die that night. At the crew's quarters, a staff member found Lek, the man who had sent the distress signal, lying in the bathroom, his body covered in blood. Dr. Cat determined that Lek had died from excessive blood loss. The strange occurrences reminded everyone of Baz's fallen tooth and the black dust in the fog. Assistant Rose began analyzing the samples. After hours of observation, she couldn't find anything unusual. Then, she dropped a single drop of blood onto the sample. To her shock, the black dust began producing living organisms, which immediately started parasitizing the blood. The black dust, it turned out, was merely a temporary state. Like parasites, these organisms sought new hosts, healing injuries and purging impurities from their bodies. This explained why Baz's wounds had healed overnight and why his tooth had fallen out. The problem was, they still didn't know how these creatures spread. Everyone felt a growing sense of despair. They had never encountered anything like this before, and the greatest fear of humanity lies in the unknown. Baz sat on the staircase, staring at the glowing light beneath the ocean. Suddenly, a vision of the seabed collapsing appeared in his mind. Perhaps the mysterious creatures were transmitting this information to Baz in some unique way. A greater catastrophe might be looming. However, the other crew members were more concerned about whether they were infected. Assistant Rose suggested isolating individuals suspected of infection until the transmission method was identified. Fulmer, who had been exposed to the black dust and had a wound on his palm, became the primary subject of observation. For now, all they could do was wait in silence. Not long after, a bright light suddenly broke through. After a full day and night of being enveloped by the strange fog, it had now unexpectedly cleared. Soon, the crew could see the neighboring rig. However, the nearby rig was emitting plumes of smoke. It was evident that it had suffered a severe incident the previous night. Perhaps this was why the rescue ship had diverted its course. This realization made the crew uneasy. What exactly were they facing? How many people were still alive? Given their current equipment, rescuing anyone from the other rig was impossible. Magnus decided to prioritize the safety of his crew. He called for a meeting. Now that the fog had lifted, their main objective was to re-establish contact with headquarters and request helicopter evacuation. But before that, they needed to clean the rig thoroughly, removing the black dust left behind by the fog, and find Baz. Magnus was determined not to leave anyone behind. The hope of returning home was within reach. Everyone felt motivated and immediately carried out the orders. The rig's misting system was activated, spraying clean water to wash the surface. Baz, hiding in a corner, felt the cool droplets on his skin. It reminded him of the comforting embrace of his mother. What Baz didn't know was that search teams equipped with full gear were scouring the rig for him. Despite being in the middle of the ocean, the rig's sheer size made locating a single person a daunting task. The crew split into groups of 3 to 5, searching every corner of the rig. Meanwhile, Magnus monitored their progress from the control room. However, not every part of the rig was covered by cameras. Magnus couldn't shake the feeling that recent events were disturbingly strange, especially the creatures resembling ash. Assistant Rose tried to reassure him, suggesting it wasn't entirely inexplicable. The oil they extracted was formed from ancient organisms. Previously, during exploration of this area, they had uncovered a fossil with cells resembling the ash-like creatures. Rose theorized that the fossil dated back around 300 million years, to the end of the Permian period. At that time, Earth experienced a mass extinction event, wiping out 90% of life, but the cause of that catastrophe remains unknown. Rose boldly speculated, could it be that, during our oil extraction, we accidentally awakened a life form from the Permian period? Magnus shuddered at the thought. He would never admit that he might be the one responsible for a potential global catastrophe. Magnus tried to reassure Rose. The ocean is one of Earth's greatest mysteries. Encountering unexplainable phenomena is normal. For example, a few years ago, 900,000 tons of seaweed appeared overnight in the Caribbean, blocking ports and shipping routes. That's another mystery yet to be solved. However, Magnus never expected that yet another inexplicable event would occur on his rig. Baz was hiding in the storage room, carefully extending his hand over a barrel of oil. Instantly, a faint blue glow appeared on the oil's surface. As Baz stared in surprise, the storage door creaked open. Garrow, a fellow crew member, entered, also searching for Baz. Soon after, Garrow noticed vegetation floating on the oil's surface. He was about to call for his teammates outside when Baz suddenly lunged at him. Moments later, two other crew members entered, only to find Garrow on the ground, groaning in pain. Garrow claimed Baz had attacked him, but his expression was strange. The group also realized the vegetation on the oil wasn't limited to this area. Other search teams had reported similar findings elsewhere. Suddenly, the rig began to shake violently. With experience from previous incidents, everyone immediately grabbed onto something sturdy. Hutton noticed Garrow acting strangely and ordered him to open his hand. To everyone's shock, Garrow's false tooth fell out, a clear sign he had been infected. Garrow quickly fled. When the shaking stopped, no one felt relieved. The crew was horrified by how quickly the life form had spread, turning Garrow into its host in mere minutes. Taking a head count, they discovered Heather, a cafeteria worker, was also missing. Someone mentioned seeing Heather near the mud pits. Cursing under his breath, Hutton grabbed a flashlight and went to look for her. At that moment, Heather was walking across the oil, which was covered with strange vegetation. She spotted Baz, struggling to find food. Baz confessed that his senses were becoming sharper, and vivid memories of hundreds of millions of years ago were flooding his mind. Heather tried to convince him not to harm their colleagues, but Baz denied responsibility. I didn't kill Alwyn. Then, with an eerie tone, he added, everything will die. I have to stop this disaster. Baz felt the end of the world was imminent. The seabed was collapsing on a massive scale, and tsunamis were approaching. Determined to stop these events, he insisted on taking action. One teammate suggested enlisting more people in their mission, but their frantic words frightened Heather, causing her to back away. Suddenly, a bright light appeared. Baz and his companion panicked and sought cover. It turned out to be rig workers who had found them. Heather, trembling and terrified, was finally rescued. The supervisor had just begun to breathe a sigh of relief when he noticed the flare stack's flame had been extinguished by the earlier tremors. The flame was critical for burning off excess fuel. If it went out, cold water could flow back into the system, potentially causing a catastrophic explosion. Unfortunately, the automatic ignition system was broken. The only option left was to reignite the flame manually, essentially a suicide mission. No one volunteered, so Magnus, the supervisor, took it upon himself to complete the task. Suddenly, Fulmer stepped forward and volunteered. The plan was simple: use a crane to bring Fulmer close to the flare stack, and then light the flame using a signal flare gun. He would need to stay far enough away to avoid the intense heat. The entire crew watched tensely as Magnus personally directed the operation. When Fulmer was halfway there, Magnus yelled for him to stop, warning that getting too close could result in severe burns. Fulmer aimed the flare gun but wasn't confident he could hit the target. He decided to unhook his safety harness and move closer. The crew looked on in shock, their eyes wide, as Fulmer advanced to within 5 meters of the flare stack. He raised the gun and pulled the trigger. When Fulmer collapsed on the ground, motionless, the rescue team rushed to him. Fortunately, thanks to his protective gear and retreating a short distance after firing, Fulmer avoided life-threatening injuries. The risky mission paid off. Fulmer successfully reignited the flare stack, saving everyone on the rig. However, the safety was only temporary, as greater dangers loomed ahead. Once again, Baz received a vision from the ancient lifeforms. He realized the pipeline leading to the seabed was the root cause of all the disasters. It had to be shut down. However, with his limited authority and only one ally, executing the plan seemed impossible. A bold idea suddenly struck Baz. Meanwhile, Fulmer's injuries had completely healed. His first stop was Rose's lab, where he offered to help her unravel the mystery of the ancient lifeforms. Rose discovered that the bacteria could communicate with each other through quorum sensing, which might explain Baz's hallucinations. Fulmer was intrigued. These bacteria had existed for hundreds of millions of years, so had they survived until now. Rose explained that many bacteria could enter a special state of dormancy, lying dormant for millions of years until they were reawakened. Unbeknownst to him, Fulmer had been unconsciously drawing circles while talking. At that moment, the lab's communication device buzzed. Magnus was summoning them to the control room. The pressure in the main pipeline was rising again. Surveillance footage showed Baz and Garrow attempting to bypass the safety controls. Were they planning to blow up the rig? Fulmer tried using the remote system to shut it down but failed. Heading to the control room where Baz was to stop him wasn't a viable option either. Who knew if they might end up like Garrow, infected by Baz's bacteria? Rose quickly proposed a solution, using a remotely operated underwater vehicle to manually close the valve at the seabed. Only this could stop the pressure from continuing to rise. Meanwhile, Baz and Garrow watched the main pipeline shaking violently from the control room. Both were tense, silently praying that their colleagues could descend in time to shut the valve. It turned out this risky plan was Baz's idea. The remotely operated underwater vehicle was swiftly deployed. When the live footage from the seabed appeared, everyone was left speechless. The ocean floor emitted a blue light forming mysterious circular patterns. However, there was no time to ponder the cause. The immediate priority was to close the valve. The remotely operated underwater vehicle operator succeeded in completing the mission, and the pressure in the main pipeline dropped instantly. Finally, they could turn their attention to studying the glowing circles on the seabed. Heather, who had interacted closely with Baz, believed his interference with the pipeline wasn't an act of sabotage but an attempt to save lives. Fulmer froze, staring at the circles. They were eerily familiar, identical to the ones he had been unconsciously drawing earlier. What could they possibly mean? In the control room, Baz noticed the main pipeline had been sealed. Despite achieving his goal, he couldn't feel any relief. The automated system might reopen the valve, and deliberate sabotage wouldn't suffice. The only solution was to reprogram the system entirely, rendering the valve inoperable. Among the crew, only Fulmer had the expertise to carry out such a task. As the control room team debated Baz's intentions, they suddenly realized that cell phone signals had been restored. It felt like salvation. The communication system was finally back online. Magnus immediately contacted the Coast Guard to request a rescue. Fulmer opened his laptop to research the circular patterns. While most of the crew called their loved ones, everyone focused on what they felt was most urgent. But their hopes were quickly dashed. Just as Fulmer uncovered critical information, the internet connection was lost. Magnus, trying to call for help, heard only screams of terror on the other end before the line went dead. Kat's situation was even more heartbreaking. The coastal city where her wife lived was also shrouded in the mysterious fog. Kat was about to warn her wife not to go outside when the call was cut off. It became clear that the disaster wasn't limited to the rig. Coastal cities were experiencing the same catastrophe. Could Earth be on the brink of extinction? Most of the crew had received grim updates about their families. Their fears now extended beyond their own safety. They desperately wanted to return home. Some suggested using the lifeboats to escape, but Magnus immediately opposed the idea. The distance to the mainland was too great, and they wouldn't make it safely. Meanwhile, Coast Guard helicopters wouldn't arrive in time. The rig descended into chaos, with emotions flaring like a lit powder keg. Desperation and frustration boiled over as the crew argued and vented their anger. Magnus, bearing the greatest responsibility, felt the crushing weight of the situation. For the first time, he lost his composure. Rose subtly noticed that Fulmer hadn't attended the meeting. She discovered that he was in the bathroom, examining his wounds. To his shock, all his external injuries had healed completely in just one day, leaving no scars. Fulmer was now certain that he, too, had been infected by the ancient lifeforms. Rose, unsure how to handle the situation, forced a smile and offered a few comforting words before returning to the meeting room. However, Fulmer's fear only grew stronger, especially as he began hearing Baz's voice, a unique form of communication used by the ancient creatures. When Rose returned to the communication room, she found a note left by Fulmer. He had left the rig to avoid spreading the infection to others. By then, Fulmer was already heading to the control area where Baz was located. Kat happened to see Fulmer rushing away and immediately followed him. Fulmer apologized before opening a steel door. Kat, unwilling to lose another teammate, unhesitatingly followed him inside. What she saw left her speechless. The metal control room had been overrun by lush vegetation. The regenerative power of the ancient lifeforms was extraordinary. Blue glowing orbs floated through the air as if they were alive. Kat froze in place, unable to move. Even more astonishing was that when the glowing orbs approached Kat, they scattered and refrained from entering her body. Only Kat knew the reason. She was 2 months pregnant. Rose managed to pull Kat out in time, but Kat remained shaken. Clearly, these ancient lifeforms possessed a high level of intelligence and an instinct to protect new life. Just then, a shout echoed across the rig. Everyone rushed outside. In the distance, a light was moving across the sea. Excitement rippled through the crew. They believed the rescue team had finally arrived. The crew hurriedly donned their rescue gear and packed their belongings. The flickering light in the distance reignited their hope. They were finally about to leave this cursed place. But as the light drew closer, their relief turned to dismay. It wasn't a rescue ship, it was a lifeboat from the nearby rig. Earlier in the day, that rig had suffered a catastrophic accident. Glen, the safety officer on their rig, argued against accepting the survivors, fearing they might be infected. Rose, however, insisted, "We're all colleagues, we can't abandon them." When the lifeboat docked, it carried a significant number of survivors. Rose arranged for them to be placed in quarantine for inspection. However, David, the leader of the group, arrogantly dismissed Rose's instructions. As a high-ranking manager from headquarters, he walked straight to the control room. There, he anxiously checked the status of the main pipeline. Rose, standing nearby, couldn't contain her curiosity and asked what had happened at the neighboring rig. Why had the accident occurred? David casually replied, "A pressure issue caused the explosion. Everyone else is dead." He spoke as though the disaster was insignificant, leaving Rose deeply unsettled. However, Rose felt that things weren't as simple as David claimed. She suspected that the incident was also related to the ancient lifeforms. Determined to find out more, Rose continued studying the mysterious circular patterns. Kat, standing nearby, commented that they resembled tree rings. Hearing this, Rose suddenly realized that the four inner circles aligned perfectly with Earth's mass extinction events. These might be unique memories possessed only by the ancient lifeforms. Based on the timeline, the last circle remained incomplete, representing our current Arath impending mass extinction. This could be a warning from the ancient lifeforms to humanity. Perhaps many people don't know that since its formation, Earth has undergone 4 mass extinction events. During each, 90% of all life was wiped out, leaving only a small number of microorganisms to survive. Now, Earth faces a 5th mass extinction. Those infected by the ancient lifeforms were the first to sense this looming danger. The core issue lies in the main pipeline of the rig, which drills deep into the seabed. It must be permanently sealed for humanity to have any chance of survival. Although Fulmer didn't fully understand the connection between the pipeline and global extinction, he decided to act. He used the control system to attempt to permanently lock the main pipeline valve. Harish, a survivor from the neighboring rig, seemed to hold some crucial information. He revealed that after David, the senior manager, arrived, he immediately seized command from the rig supervisor and began dumping something into the seabed through the main pipeline. David claimed it was part of an experiment, but the rig suddenly exploded. Everyone was shocked by this revelation. They wanted to press Harish for more details, but he seemed too scared to divulge further information. Kat conducted a full checkup on Harish and confirmed that he wasn't infected. She assured him that with proper rest, he would recover. Meanwhile, Magnus took extra precautions. He instructed Kat to use the internal network to investigate David, suspecting that his intentions were far from innocent. The results were as expected. David wasn't listed as an employee of the company. This meant either he was an imposter or someone with exceptionally high clearance. Magnus, too exhausted from the recent string of crises, decided to confront David directly. He demanded answers. Why did the neighboring rig explode, and what was David's real purpose? David was surprisingly candid. He admitted that he was conducting a secret experiment for headquarters. If successful, the experiment would dramatically increase the quantity and quality of oil extracted. David also declared his intention to continue these experiments at this rig. Magnus was furious. This was his rig, yet David completely disregarded his authority. Shaking with anger, Magnus once again felt the looming danger. He was certain that David was up to something sinister. Rose suspected that David's experiment might be connected to the ancient lifeforms in the seabed. If Fulmer were here, things would be much easier. Since Fulmer was infected, he could communicate with the ancient lifeforms, which would help uncover the truth. Although Baz was also infected, his introverted nature made him difficult to approach. He distrusted others and struggled to express his thoughts clearly. While everyone was discussing how to locate Fulmer, David secretly set his disruptive plan into motion. Using his authority as a senior manager, he gathered several staff members, including Hutton, Dullen, and head chef Colin, into a private room. David told them the company was conducting a secret experiment. If it succeeded, the oil field wouldn't shut down, and everyone would keep their jobs. For employees fearing unemployment, this promise was an irresistible lure. They quickly agreed to support David. He then explained his plan. The key to the experiment was reopening the main pipeline. However, the control area was occupied by Fulmer's group, and they needed to be expelled. David revealed that every rig was equipped with a significant amount of CO2 stored specifically for experiments. if this gas were released into the fire suppression system of the control area, it would render Baz's group unconscious due to oxygen deprivation. This was the most effective way to retake the area. David's team nodded in agreement and prepared for action. With his elevated clearance, David opened a storage facility that even Magnus couldn't access. Inside were numerous canisters containing an unknown gas. Despite not knowing the exact contents, Hutton followed David's orders. The group covertly approached Baz's control area and introduced the mysterious gas into the fire suppression system. As the system activated, David carefully monitored the situation from the control room, waiting for the perfect moment to seal off the control area and trap those inside. Meanwhile, Fulmer's team was still struggling to lock the main pipeline. However, this task required extremely high clearance, and Fulmer was unable to bypass it. He attempted to disable the equipment, but the result was the exact opposite of what they intended. The main pipeline opened automatically. It seemed the company had designed the rig to ensure the main pipeline couldn't be completely sealed, likely to avoid incurring significant financial losses. At that moment, Baz sensed someone entering the control area. Garrow stood up to check, while Baz continued encouraging Fulmer. Baz emphasized that only by sealing the main pipeline could they stop the ancient lifeforms from attacking humanity, otherwise, provoking them would lead to humanity's extinction. The neighboring rig's destruction was a stark example. Under the guise of experimentation, they had poured something into the ocean via the main pipeline, triggering the ancient lifeforms' violent retaliation and resulting in the rig's explosion. So what exactly was this gas? Hutton's group quickly found the answer. After injecting the mysterious gas into the fire suppression system and activating it, a large amount of unidentified gas was released into the control area. Fulmer's group immediately noticed something was wrong and rushed toward the door. Garrow was the first to spot Hutton's group. He was about to yell at them but suddenly collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Dillon quickly realized that the gas provided by David wasn't CO2 but a deadly toxic gas. He shouted for Hutton and Colin to run away immediately. Hutton and Colin wasted no time. The moment they realized the danger, they bolted. Watching through surveillance cameras, David saw that the plan had succeeded and sealed the control area. Unfortunately, Dillon was too slow and got trapped inside. Hutton was terrified. He couldn't believe David was so ruthless, willing to sacrifice his own team to deal with Baz's group, but Hutton still underestimated David's ambition. David's real goal was to eradicate all the ancient lifeforms in the control area, and the mysterious gas was his weapon of choice. Baz noticed the green plants along the corridor withering rapidly before he, too, collapsed. Fulmer managed to reach the fire suppression system's control box but didn't have the key to shut it off. In the end, he collapsed in despair. In the control room, David was ecstatic. He believed he had completed the first phase of his plan, but his victory was short-lived as Kat burst in. Seeing the images on the surveillance monitors, she immediately realized David's malicious actions and called for Magnus's team. David justified his actions, claiming that humanity could only be saved by exterminating the ancient lifeforms. Rose, however, argued the opposite. The ancient lifeforms had existed for hundreds of millions of years, and eliminating them completely was impossible. Magnus didn't waste time debating. His priority was to save lives. Unfortunately, the fire suppression system couldn't be shut off remotely. Someone had to go to the control area and turn it off manually. All Magnus could do at the moment was unlock the door. Rose, worried for Fulmer's group, grabbed an oxygen tank from Hutton and rushed into the toxic control area. The first person she found was Dillon, frozen in death, just a step away from escaping. She was shocked to see the dead trees on the ground, a testament to the gas' devastating power. Continuing down the corridor, she found Fulmer lying motionless. She immediately shut off the fire suppression system to stop the gas from spreading further, then fitted Fulmer with an oxygen mask, hoping he would wake up. When that didn't work, Rose had him carried out of the control area. But as they moved, numerous glowing blue orbs emerged from the withered plants. The ancient lifeforms weren't completely dead after all. Their resilience was far greater than humanity had ever imagined. Once again, the path was filled with glowing blue orbs. The ancient lifeforms parasitizing Fulmer's body also awakened. Rose, overjoyed, helped him outside. Baz, the first to be infected, also regained consciousness. However, poor Garrow did not receive the same second chance and remained lifeless. This incident resulted in the deaths of 2 crew members, leaving Hutton, who had directly participated in David's plan, consumed by guilt. He regretted listening to David's manipulative promises. This wasn't an experiment to improve oil extraction, it was an act of defiance against the ancient lifeforms. Unlike before, Magnus didn't blame him this time. Those deaths weren't Hutton's fault, the true culprit was David. Magnus advised, instead of dwelling on guilt, it's better to stand up and fight back. After some thought, Hutton nodded in agreement. Magnus later met with Rose and Fulmer, who had just escaped danger. The three agreed that David's authority needed to be revoked. If not, everyone on the rig could perish under his reckless leadership. David was quickly confined to a private room. Magnus demanded that he reveal everything about the ancient lifeforms. Even if David refused to talk, the survivors from the neighboring rig would provide valuable information. For the first time, David's face showed a hint of tension. In reality, he claimed to be carrying out a secret order from headquarters, to save humanity. Meanwhile, Baz, parasitized by the ancient lifeforms, felt immense pain as he watched his teammates die. His eyes reflected worry and frustration. David's reckless actions had enraged the ancient lifeforms, and even Baz was now ostracized by them because he was human. They severed all communication with him. Baz was certain that the ancient lifeforms would soon launch a full-scale retaliation. The underwater oil field had become a habitat for ancient lifeforms, transforming crude oil into an ecosystem for vegetation. In an effort to protect its interests, the oil company used the main pipeline to dump an unknown substance into the seabed, intending to eradicate the ancient lifeforms. However, these organisms demonstrated extraordinary resilience, quickly regrouping to launch a counterattack. This led to rising pressure in the main pipeline, culminating in the rig's catastrophic explosion. A senior manager from the company admitted the truth. He defended his actions, stating that the ancient lifeforms not only polluted the oil supply but also parasitized humans. If not eradicated while still weak, they could grow stronger and pose a threat to humanity's survival. Magnus sighed. Isn't it our excessive oil drilling that awakened these creatures in the first place? Yet, at some point, Magnus found himself begrudgingly agreeing with David's extreme measures. However, Magnus's perspective shifted after hearing more from the survivors. They revealed that more people could have escaped the neighboring rig if not for David's selfishness. He prioritized his safety, jumping into a lifeboat and ordering it to depart, even though it had 20 empty seats. This revelation left Magnus feeling deeply disillusioned. With David's approach, the workers on the rig could be sacrificed at any moment. Rose also found David's methods too extreme. She believed that the ancient lifeforms, with their extraordinary abilities and high intelligence, should not be treated as enemies. Instead, humanity should strive for peaceful coexistence rather than a destructive confrontation. Currently, Fulmer was the key. At Rose's request, he tried to re-establish communication with the ancient lifeforms, hoping to convey a message of peace. However, what Fulmer received was a chilling warning. The ancient lifeforms were preparing for a massive seabed collapse that would trigger tsunamis capable of submerging coastal cities. This was their response to David's relentless attacks. The ancient lifeforms had decided on a brutal retaliation. Baz, the first to be parasitized, felt this most keenly. He realized that he had completely lost his connection with them. Baz knew there was no way to salvage the situation now. Cracks on the seabed widened, causing the rig to shake violently. Although the tremors soon stopped, Magnus felt no relief. He believed this was merely the prelude to the ancient lifeforms' impending vengeance. The rig's crew now faced a life-or-death situation. Magnus, overwhelmed with panic, could no longer consider Rose's proposal for peace. Instead, he turned to David for a solution. David proposed a plan. If Magnus agreed to use the main pipeline to exterminate the ancient lifeforms, he would ensure the safety of everyone on the rig. David claimed to have already arranged for rescue helicopters. When Magnus announced the plan, it was met with fierce opposition from most of the crew. They argued that such an action would only further provoke the ancient lifeforms. Even if they escaped on the helicopters, humanity would still face extinction. Magnus, hesitant but defensive, asked, what if David really can destroy the ancient lifeforms? Fulmer, the one most familiar with them, disagreed. They have an incredible capacity for regeneration. A single rig isn't enough to defeat them. Rose added, the ancient lifeforms likely inhabit the entire ocean. Wiping out those near the rig won't solve anything. She insisted that seeking peace was the only viable option. David, standing nearby, interjected, throughout Earth's history, whenever two intelligent species meet, one always destroys the other. Rose retorted, that's nonsense. Many species coexist symbiotically. Unable to argue further, David lost his temper and declared Rose fired. Magnus immediately intervened, demanding David be quiet. Rose, unfazed by the dismissal, proposed that Magnus find Baz. As the first human to be parasitized, Baz might persuade the ancient lifeforms to reduce their hostility toward humanity. After some deliberation, Magnus agreed. Even if they failed to negotiate peace, he still wanted to save Baz, who was his crew member. However, Kat voiced her objections. She believed the ancient lifeforms were unlikely to negotiate, and all she wanted now was to return home to reunite with her wife. Magnus empathized with Kat's feelings but decided to proceed with Rose and Fulmer. Before departing, he instructed Hutton to keep a close eye on David to prevent any further reckless actions. The group of three quickly reached the control area. The first thing they saw was the body of a man, his eyes wide open in death, surrounded by dense vegetation. Magnus, heartbroken, adjusted the man's position and gently closed his eyes. Magnus firmly declared, I won't let another subordinate die. The three pressed forward. To their surprise, the plants in the area had grown waist-high. They found Baz standing motionless, staring at a glowing orb. Magnus wasted no time explaining why they had come. "We are here to protect the ancient lifeforms and ensure they are no longer attacked." But Baz, tears streaming down his face, replied hopelessly, "It's too late." He explained that the ancient lifeforms had severed all communication with him. Then, he collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by despair. Meanwhile, as expected, David was causing trouble again. He approached Harish, the survivor from the neighboring rig, and told him he could help everyone escape safely if Harish would assist him with one task. Harish, hesitant but unwilling to defy David, followed him to the main control room. After dismissing unrelated staff, David decided to reopen the main pipeline to pump more deadly toxins into the seabed and exterminate the ancient lifeforms. Harish, recalling the explosion at the neighboring rig caused by the same action, asked, "Shouldn't we warn everyone to evacuate first?" David coldly replied, "There's no time to warn them now. It's their fault for missing their chance." Harish, though fearful of opposing David, secretly activated the rig's PA system, broadcasting their conversation to everyone. Harish intentionally provoked David, who openly admitted, "Even if the rig explodes and everyone dies, I'll be fine because the rescue helicopters are on their way. Now is the perfect time to go all out against the ancient lifeforms." The other workers, shocked and furious, immediately rushed to the control room. At the same time, a powerful tremor shook the rig, far more intense than before, as if it were about to collapse. David realized that the ancient lifeforms had begun their retaliation. He activated the system to pump toxins into the main pipeline. As Kat's group reached the control room, they heard the sound of rescue helicopters outside. David, having timed everything perfectly, left a warning and bolted toward the helipad. Harish's group stayed behind, trying to shut down the pipeline system. When David saw the helicopter preparing to land, a smug smile spread across his face, but he was surprised to find Hutton waiting for him. "You put this rig in danger, and now you want to run away." David quickly defended himself. "The two helicopters are enough to take everyone off the rig. If I die, none of you will get out of here." Hutton hesitated but ultimately decided not to harm David. The priority was ensuring his colleagues' safety. Hutton then called all the workers to prepare for evacuation, while he kept an eye on David to prevent further trouble. The faint hope of survival brought excitement as everyone hurried toward the helipad. Head chef Colin counted the staff and realized that Magnus and Fulmer were missing. At that moment, they were still in the control area, watching as the glowing blue orbs multiplied. Rose wanted to try one last time. Baz, too, felt they couldn't give up easily. Perhaps this was their final chance to save the world. Rose slowly stepped forward, intending to merge with the ancient lifeforms, but the glowing orbs avoided her, clustering together to form a complete circle. The symbol of the fifth mass extinction. It was clear the ancient lifeforms had given up on reconciliation. At the same time, the outer circle beneath the seabed closed completely. Cracks widened, triggering an unprecedented large-scale seabed collapse. The rig shook violently once again. Magnus's group realized there was no longer any hope for negotiation and decided to leave. As they reached the exit, Baz suddenly stopped. He recalled that the ancient lifeforms nurtured plants to sustain themselves, forming a symbiotic relationship. Moreover, they had saved his life. Baz declared that if he must die, he would give his flesh and blood back to them. Perhaps this act would show humanity's goodwill and prevent their retaliation. Magnus looked at Baz with deep respect. Without saying another word, he turned and left. Meanwhile, the other staff had boarded the helicopters and taken off. Hutton's group anxiously waited, scanning the horizon for Magnus. Finally, Magnus's group appeared, but moments later, a massive wave formed on the horizon. Everyone froze in shock as the colossal tsunami rushed toward them. Magnus's group hurried aboard the helicopter, managing to take off just before the tsunami engulfed the rig. In the control area, Baz slowly approached the glowing orbs. His body gradually dissolved into them. A second later, the tsunami swallowed the entire rig. When it re-emerged, it was nothing more than 2 heaps of rubble. From the helicopter, Magnus's group watched in terror. They knew this was only the beginning. The tsunami was heading straight for the mainland. Kat, worried about her family, urged the pilot to fly faster. But David interjected, "This helicopter isn't taking us home." At first, no one understood what David meant, but when they saw the tsunami towering over half the sky, despair filled their faces. In an apartment in a coastal city, the doctor's wife felt the ground tremble. Turning to the window, she saw the massive tsunami approaching. From that moment on, the people on the helicopter no longer had homes to return to. This concludes the story of The Rig. What did you think of the film? On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you next time.